What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and I have an album review for you, and one that I have been eagerly anticipating for what seems like maybe the last 6 years. Today, I'm going to go over the latest offering from the great old ones, Kadath. This comes out on the 24th of January on Season of Mist Records. This band formed in France in 2009. This is their 5th album overall. Again, a 6-year break from the last one, Cosmocism, which I thought was absolutely amazing. I got into them with the album before that, E.O.D or E.O.D, A Tale of Dark Legacy. I was pretty much just drawn to that one when I heard it was Lovecraftian themed, post-black metal, maybe progressive black metal. It feels a little bit more debatable on this album because I'm kind of leaning away from calling this band post-black metal and kind of just ready to call them progressive black metal, because this is kind of a huge step for this band. Now, when it comes down to the lineup of this band, I don't believe much has changed since Cosmocism outside of this band having a new drummer. Julian Diana, I'm not sure how to say your name. That's kind of par for the course with a lot of foreign bands. But right from the rip, this just feels different than Cosmocism. And I actually went back and jammed Cosmocism not too long ago. And production-wise, it's kind of night and day. Whereas Cosmocism felt, more cold and more dark. Like, it literally sounds like being lost and just kind of floating in space amongst, Lovecraftian gods, obviously. This production is much bigger, much more dense, much more lavish, and drum work on here is definitely different. Like, the previous drummer I thought was really good, solid, like a lot of blast beats. His fills were tasteful. The drums had a very raw sound to them. Here, this just sounds bigger. It doesn't sound overproduced, but the drums sound a little bit more natural and a little bit more full. There's also way more of a pronounced low end on here. You can really make out the bass. But this new drummer adds a lot. Style-wise, he is incorporating a lot more clever fills, rhythms. It's not just blast beats and double time grooves. There's lots of off-time sections and crazy cymbal work. And with this more creative drum work, honestly, I feel like it kind of opens up the rest of the band as far as songwriting, because these songs are possibly the most dynamic batch that this band has brought forth so far. All the songs minus The Gathering, which is just an interlude, are over the 7-minute mark. They are lavish. There's lots of transitions, riff changes, whole mood changes. And in terms of the approach of this album, it just feels more centered on melody, but at the same time, they didn't sacrifice any of that cold, distant atmosphere that this band is known for. The opening track, Me the Dreamer, opens up with some lush synths in the background and then some fluttering acoustic passages before going full bore to this double time, very anthemic riff. And I was kind of expecting something a little bit more cold and dark. I mean, this is Lovecraftian horror we're talking about. And generally I expect a, overwhelming feeling of cosmic dread. But right out of the gate, this feels bright, very vibrant, very anthemic. It does inevitably shift into darker, more distant territory, a la Ulcerate. I would say Sulphureon is very comparable, not only in style, but also in themes. I would even throw in Downfall of Gaia, Wolves on the Throne Room, and honestly, in terms of some of the crazy riff changes on here, some dissection. While this band loves dissonance and atmosphere and layering the guitars to sound lush and full and, playing with melodies in terms of counter melodies and strange harmonies, this band still loves the riff. And they frequently come back to it. All of these songs have sections where they just kind of lay on a riff for a second before taking you on another twisted cosmic journey where the atmosphere feels like it's just sort of surrounding you and squeezing you. But more so on this album, I feel like there's just a bigger sense of dynamic, just in terms of turning the songs on their head, kind of surprising you a little bit. This first track, Me the Dreamer, while it comes in just, ferocious but anthemic, it feels like a downhill charge. There is an amazing break that I wouldn't call a chorus break, because these songs really aren't structured like verse-chorus as much. There's definitely repeating parts, but it's definitely not I would say, contemporary song structure overall. But there is a repeated part in there that just kind of breaks into a straightforward 4/4 time groove and this heavy, melodic, but still very dissonant strumming. Honestly, it kind of reminded me a bit of Killing Joke. There's even a point around the middle of the song where everything drops out and builds from this tribal drum pattern and starts to get more dark and ominous before breaking out the blast beats again. Under the Sign of Kadath also kind of surprised me as it starts out more melancholic. In fact, like the dreary strummed riffs and the more like somber vibe to the start of it reminded me a lot of like early Catatonia, which was something I really wasn't expecting. There's lots of just crazy peaks and valleys in these songs that I wouldn't say like I didn't find on their previous works, but here they just feel more vibrant and more hooky. Like there's legit earworms on here that just kind of get stuck in your head. In contrast to the story in The Mouth of Madness, which is probably like my favorite Lovecraft story, that song I feel is just very beautiful and serene, but it balances that out with like some really sinister energy too. So you get this big moody shift like across that song, but that's also across this album. Again, their use of dynamics on here, it keeps these songs interesting, and again, they're long, they're written in movements. So crafting engaging songs with songs that long, that's very important here. And across the board, I was just really enthralled by the songwriting in here. It's almost as like engaging and as hypnotic as the atmosphere in here, which there's a lot of extra cool stuff in here to kind of like just make this sound even bigger. The use of synths on here, I think, is awesome. And one of the reasons why I think they're awesome is they're well placed, they're not overbearing, they're not so out in front in the mix where they kind of like take over the song. They're in the background accenting a lot of this. And honestly, it's that sort of like agent that thickens up the mix a little bit. There's frequently like bassy synths in the background to kind of add this like low background hum. And it's nice because it doesn't occupy that same space that the bass actually does. In fact, the bass is very audible throughout this entire album, which I kind of felt like Cosmocism was a little skimpy on the bass. I mean, a fair amount of black metal is kind of skimpy on the bass, to be fair. But, you know, I think with like a more progressive sound, you definitely want to showcase, you know, all your musicians. I think they're particularly good in transition though. Like when they go to like a big dropout with clean guitars, when you hear that little hum in the background and sort of like building up along with the guitars, I think they're very effective. The other thing that I think really works on here, and I think is a step up from the last one, are the vocals. I love this dude's vocals. Honestly, he sounds like Michael Stahn from Dark Tranquillity and like a litany of other bands that Michael Stahn's in right now. His growls are clear, they're sinister, they're gravelly, but there's also clean singing on here. It's not like, you know, poppy, sing-songy stuff. They're more or less chants. There's even some spoken word, which are actually pretty evocative themselves. The 15-minute absolute banger called Lang, which is an instrumental for like 14 minutes and like 50 seconds. But there's a section of spoken word on there that is, you know, particularly haunting. It's a little bit muttered. It's also in French. I don't know what he said there. It could have been something pleasant, could have been something about Cthulhu. I don't know. But it works well in transition. Even on the last track, Astral Void, End of the Dream, there is a section of more spoken word on there, but they're more panicked. They're more fast. It definitely captures like a bit of like the more horror vibe. Like it feels like someone like saying their last words as something is slowly stalking them in the night, or, you know, the chick blubbering in Blair Witch Project, well, snot rolled down her nose. As much as I like the vocals, though, the big standout on here is Lang. Lang, the 15-minute amazing instrumental. Honestly, that might have some of the catchiest riffs on this entire album. It is anthemic. It arguably has some of the most progressive flourishes on it with the transitions and such. It is definitely more centered on melody, but of course you get like spots of just pure dissonance and like atonal atmosphere and creepiness. The song also has beautiful clean sections. I love the clean playing that's on the bridge of that song, or one of the many bridges of that song. It reminded me a lot of, you know, Opeth, Blackwater Park in particular, just those cleaner passages going into heavier sections. And in terms of one of the heaviest moments on this entire album, it's definitely on that song with the kind of out of nowhere funeral doom breakdown. A lot of the riff work on here is generally very fast paced, like lots of like heavy tremolo, and again, fiercely layered tremolo harmonies all over this album. So hearing this band break down into slow, monotonous, droning riffs and plodding drums with just this absolutely suffocating, dark, sinister atmosphere, that was kind of unexpected. Now, granted, with the atmosphere, of course, Lovecraft, I expect like cosmic dread and again, all of that fun stuff associated with it. But honestly, here on this album, I didn't get that much of it. Those from Althar and Astral Void, End of the Dream are probably the most consistently dark songs. Like, there's less of those bright anthemic melodies. Those from Althar is probably the most distant track, like lots of these strange atonal riffs and counter melodies and such, but it still has like just enough melody on it. Same thing with Astral Void 2, where it just feels notably darker, but a lot of this just has very bright melodic hooks. And it kind of does take away from like the whole, you know, like Cthulhu vibe where you kind of expect things to sound, well, I mean, to quote Lovecraft, indescribable horror, like something you can't really just pinpoint, but you know it's scary. I definitely got less of that in comparison to what I've listened to by this band, but that isn't to say what I heard was bad. And I'm also not saying that this isn't heavier than hell, too. I know I've spoke on the melody quite a bit, but there's some bone-crunching, heavy moments on here. Me, the Dreamer, I really wasn't expecting a bone-crushing breakdown with ambient synths behind it, but it showed up, and it was heavy, and I would argue there's a good chunk of this album that kind of borders on black and death metal. There's definitely death metal riffs that pop up, but I would probably call this more progressive black metal than I would call it black and death metal or anything else. There's just something about this album that it's just a bit different in terms of their previous works, especially in terms of like the elaborate nature of a lot of these transitions and such. This feels more like a prog album. With post-metal in general, I feel like there is a need to be patient with it. The builds are generally longer. It kind of takes time because generally the whole thing is building in layers and then kind of shrinking by layers too. Here, I don't necessarily feel that in terms of the transitions. A lot of the time they come out like full bore, it's heavy, it's already anchored itself with a great riff, and then they keep building on it with melodies. And then the transitions again are like a little bit more intricate, and again, there's a lot of different flavors that are thrown in here. Hell, Under the Sign of Koth, there's some like flat out heavy metal harmonies that are thrown in there before they go back to the dissonance well, where, you know, a good chunk of this does live, but it's done really well, and it's done melodically. Like, this is done like, you know, how Ulcerate does it, where they make dissonance catchy. It's not just an atmospheric thing where it sounds like they're plucking any note. They are creating melodies, they are creating hooks, and they stick with you. And honestly, because of that balance between just great riff work, atmosphere, dissonance, all that stuff, I would say that this might be probably their most listenable album. Like, for an album that is, you know, definitely complex, it's lavish, it's, you know, drawn out but methodically paced. There's enough surface level stuff in here to really anchor you in, and then as the album goes on, or after repeated listens, it starts really opening up even more. In terms of any negatives on here, I'd be hard pressed to actually find one. Yeah, I could complain about The Gathering being just an interlude track. It does work as a good setup into Lang, which is honestly like probably my favorite track on here. And while I could argue that The Gathering could have just been incorporated into Lang and it could have just been the, you know, soft lead into that song, it's not terrible as a standalone track. That's about it though. And as much as I liked Cosmicism, I think this might be better. So overall, I'm gonna give this 4.5 stars. This album is flat out amazing front to back. It has some of their best songwriting to date. I think their best production. The new drummer, I think, opens up a lot of different stuff that this band, I don't think, was doing quite as well as they're doing on here. But the main thing is the songwriting. The songwriting on here is some of their best. They find such a great way to blend both like that dissonant, just atonal, creepy sound with flat out great riffs and melodies. Their song structure, I think, is awesome. The songs didn't drag really at any point. I was always excited for the next transition, and there were still some really cool surprises that I wasn't expecting. Lang in particular is probably my biggest standout. I loved every second of that song, but honestly, I loved all these songs, and I think they stand apart from each other really well. They each have unique traits about them, but all of them complement one another. This album's fantastic. If you were a big fan, again, of Sulphur Aeon, again, I would say Dissection. There's definitely some Dissection level stuff on here. Definitely Downfall of Gaia and Wolves of the Throne Room too. And I don't know, like there's even some stuff in here that kind of reminds me of like Opeth and Enslaved. If any of those bands sound awesome, check this out. This album was amazing. So if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up. And if you were new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We also have memberships. They are only 99 cents, and we do a members-only live stream as our lone perk. We might have to wait a little bit for one because, unfortunately, one of the reasons why this weekend is going to be kind of dominated by me doing solo reviews is John has been battling norovirus, which, let me tell you, he's not been having a good time with that. But he's on the mend now. Going to give him a little bit more time to recover, and we will get back to you about like what we're doing for a members-only stream, because I don't know. I haven't decided whether or not we should do like a subject or just hang out and shoot the shit. Either way, it's always fun. But yeah, the memberships are the new way to support the channel. We also still have our store with our shirts and hats, thrallsmetal.com, which is linked down below in the video description. And of course, if you want to become a member, there's a join button down here someplace. And of course, thank you guys so much for all the likes, all the shares, the comments, literally everything. You guys have just kind of helped this channel grow well beyond any expectations that I ever had. Tons more content coming in the future. We are shooting the Motley Crue ranking this weekend, so I'll be thankful to finally get that one over with, and we can move on to literally any other band. I really just want to listen to a different band than Motley Crue. Anyway, one more big thank you because you guys are awesome, and we will catch you later.